Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to my debating class with Mr. Furqan Mukakim. Today I'm going to assess or adjudicate your performance in our debating practice, and I will focus on two speakers, the Prime Ministers and the Leader of Opposition. Before we begin with, I just want to remind you all, you need to listen and also watch the audio of your fans' performance to make sure you can understand or you can catch my discussion today. If you don't watch, it's not easy for you to catch what do I mean in my discussion for today's video. Okay, as we know, our motion was this House regrets Indonesian government releasing prisoners under the reasons coronavirus pandemic. Begin with the Prime Minister, Mr. Supriyadi. I'm going to discuss 3 points about the background, definitions, and also the arguments that have been given by the Prime Minister. Okay, first of all, about the background. Before that, our motion was this House requests Indonesian government releasing prisoners under the reasons coronavirus pandemic. Overall, Mr. Supriyadi's speech was good, but it was over time. Remember, as a speaker in debating, especially for BP debate, you only have 7 minutes and 20 seconds to speak. It's not allowed for you to speak more than that. If you, the tolerance is about 5 seconds, that's okay. But if your speech for about more than 8 minutes, that is not allowed in BP debate. If you speak or speech too long, the timekeeper will remind you by knocking the signs or by giving the signs, or even they can stop your speech because you only have 7 minutes and 20 seconds, remember. Now I'm going to assess one by one about the background definitions and arguments. Now firstly about the backgrounds. You begin your speech by having an introduction. That's okay to have small introductions telling us you're acting as Prime Minister, for example. But actually in BP debate, no need to do this because the chairperson has called you previously, and of course the adjudicators know the speakers in front of them is the Prime Minister or is you. So you know you don't need to explain or to introduce yourself in front of the adjudicators because you don't have enough time to do that. Then move on to your background. You explain really well about the background. You gave us a very clear problem identification about what's going on in status quo, especially explaining about the reason why our minister or our government released these policies, and you also a little bit comments on that policy, and you also give us some problems or some cases appears after the policies released by the government. Okay, actually that's good to have this background, but the problem was you speak too slow, then you spend much time in this part. Remember, you still have to explain out the definition or the argument, especially in your speech. Don't spend your time explaining about the background, because the role of backgrounds in your speech as a Prime Minister just to open our discussions, to attract the House what actually the problems behind the motions. For example, you gave us some examples. If you think this example is really are really important to be discussed, you may discuss or give us in your arguments later on. Okay, now move on to your definition. You defined three keywords on the definitions. Number one, regrets. Number two, Indonesian governments. And number three, about other reasons of coronavirus pandemic. Actually, you do not need to define every single words in your definitions. Just explain us the most important keywords in the definition. Yes, regret is one of the most important keywords in this motion. Just explain us what do you mean by this by regrets. You said that it means you as the Prime Minister disagrees and dissatisfying the policies of our governments or Indonesian government policies to release the prisoners under the reasons of coronavirus pandemic. But actually, I really need more explanation about what do you mean by regrets? What do you mean by disagree? What do you want to do if you disagree with these policies? But at least you have defined this. At least you have what's called clear stance that you disagree with the policies. You want to stop. I assume you want to do not release these policies because these policies is so problematic. And number two, explain about Indonesian government. I don't think you need to explain about this, but actually in your definition, you talk about the policies backgrounds and why the government, release the prisoners, and this is really good actually, but it doesn't explain what is Indonesian government. Or you can you may replace these terms by saying, for example, the reason why Indonesian government releasing the prisoners, or what is the basis or the basic of our government release these policies, for example. And next, you also explain about what is coronavirus. Yes, actually, this is really good to start your definition by explaining the coronavirus. What is coronavirus? You talk about it is a respiratory disease. This is dangerous, and so on and so forth. But actually, what I heard in your speech, you divine too much about these viruses. Actually, that's okay, but remember, you don't have enough time to explain every single details of coronavirus. Assuming that every single speakers or the members of the House are or the member of the House know about what is coronavirus. But if you want to divine, just divine it in general. That's okay. Don't spend much time for your definitions. Okay. And now move on to your arguments. I really like the way how you explain your arguments. You really explain your arguments clearly, and you can elaborate it really well. But the problem on your arguments was about the headings of your argument. For example, argument number one, you talk about how to say releasing prisoners to trigger more criminal actions done by the prisoners. I heard that you did not mention clear heading of these arguments or clear statement of your arguments. I need a kinds of statement before start your explanation or elaborations on that. So just make a very what's called clear and beautiful or intimidative how to say statement to start your explanation or elaborations in your first argument. But in terms of elaboration, it was good. You explain how the criminal action will appear after releasing the prisoners and why these conditions possibly happen in the future. And you also explain or gave us some examples of the issues, like you brought the case in Bali, in Blitar, and so on and so forth. And for me, this is really good. Remember, in elaborations, you need to first giving the statement, then elaborate by giving the reason under the statement, then give us the examples or the evidences about the arguments. Then you may finish your argument by link back the arguments to the motion or to the issues. That's for arguments number one. Now, argument number two about the economical issue. Your statement was raises new problem in economy. I think this is a good argument, but if I heard from your elaboration a little bit the same like what we have discussed in the first argument, at the end of your speech or elaboration, you explain how the economical factors trigger the prisoners to committing crimes in the future. And I need more different elaborations in terms of economical sectors. What do you mean by economical regions in your discussions? And before I conclude your performance, I want to say you need to speak a little bit fast or to speak a little bit more effective to make sure all of your content or all of your arguments can be transferred out to the house or especially to the adjudicators. Do not speak too slow because you remember if I talked previously, you only have 7 minutes and 20 seconds. That's all for the Prime Minister. Let's move on to the Leader of Opposition, Ms. Marlisa. As I've written on my material, what is the first thing that the Leader of Opposition to do is giving us general statement showing the position as the opposition team. But what I heard from the audio given by Marlisa as leader of opposition, you spoke too long in this part. I asked you to give a general statement, just giving us an opening speech or an opening statement about your position as the leader of opposition. Do not explain the argument, do not explain the reason why you do not agree with this motion. You may explain this later on in your argument or in your rebuttals when you try to respond or rebut your opponent, in this case the Prime Minister. The second of all about rebuttals, I didn't see a clear rebuttals on your speech. You didn't mention which argument do you want to rebut or which arguments are you going to rebut in your speech. You just explain a little bit what's called elaboration on the reason why you do not agree with this motion. However, what I've heard from the audio, most of your speech you were backlasting with your position as the opposition team. Sometimes your statements support the arguments as the opposition team, but more than that, you support the arguments of the government team or the Prime Minister. If you are acting as the leader of opposition, if we see the motion, this House requests Indonesian governments release prisoners under the reasons coronavirus pandemic. What is your position as the leader of opposition? You do not want to regret this and you support Indonesian government releasing prisoners from the jail under the reasons of coronavirus pandemic. But after hearing your arguments of your speech, I heard that most of your speech talk about the bad impact or the weaknesses of this policy, and it means that you support the arguments of the government bench. Can I move on to your arguments? Okay, for the rebuttals, I just want to remind you again, please mention first which argument are you going to rebut, then followed by your response toward the arguments. And the next is about the arguments. you brought two arguments. Unfortunately, those two arguments um, do not support or strengthen your position as the opposition, but you strengthen the arguments that have been given by the Prime Minister. This is really unfortunate because as the leader of opposition, your position is that you have to tackle or you have to tackle down the arguments given by your opponent. Do not bring the arguments that support the arguments of the government. That's all from me about our assessments, about my assessment for our debating practice 1. If you have questions about this assessment or these adjudications, please leave questions below. It is must for you to leave the questions below to indicate your attendance in my classroom. Thank you very much for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.